affordability, the economy, and this is because President Trump will have a major event tonight, a rally, if you will, I guess in celebrating the economy. We're going to find out more about that. We do know that this is still, pretty early in the process of an economic fix. There have been some pluses. Of course, they are touting the eggs dropping in price, and that became a huge deal last year. We were talking a lot about eggs. Then eggs seem to get off the news. But hey, eggs did drop. But look, I think we're also now seriously heading into 1 year down as President Trump as president. And look, when you only have one term as president, I think things do change. The expectations change. What your goals, your presidential promises, your promises in the campaign start to be adjusted. And look, I always say you can give a year where you are blaming the other president because you are having to work your way out of a pretty big hole. That always is the case, and I think that there's truth to that. You got to give time for there to be an economic reset of any kind. And Will, as we've discussed, it's not like it's an easy thing to ever bring prices down. Stability is sometimes maybe something you can shoot for more than to bring the cost of goods down or cost of anything down. It's just simply not how things are set up here. But they're still blaming the Biden administration. I think it's okay to do that, but I think we're about a month away, especially when you're talking about a presidency that is only going to last another 3 years, and probably another really year and a half, year till the midterms, and a year and a half until you start finding out who could potentially be our next president of the United States. Things have to start moving if you want to meet those campaign promises, and I think the idea of blaming it just on your predecessor starts to go away in about 6 to 8 weeks.
President Trump will be speaking at a rally for someone who's running for the House of Representatives in the midterm in Pennsylvania, obviously a state that President Trump won, but that is more of a purple state. It is a swing state as we traditionally think of it. And with a congressional race in a year where affordability has really risen to the top of concerns of Americans. And
as it should be.
What they are saying the president will do tonight is kind of shift the messaging where he has been just blaming the previous administration and just saying, like, I'm doing things. He is really going to tackle this saying, I am working on affordability for the American people. We'll see what that language ends up looking like, and if he stays on script. I think that's another big problem. The president likes to tout his economic chops, likes to be the one that's the businessman that can fix the economy. However, what we've seen pop up in all of these special elections or the mayoral race, the off year in New York, as well as in Virginia, what has been at the top of the mind of voters is affordability.
Just yesterday, President Trump was saying we're bringing prices way down. You can call it affordability or anything you want. The Democrats caused this affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it. We actually have the bite. You can hear from President Trump himself, so you can kind of understand his tone of where he's coming from, because again, I think this plays. I think giving it a year is totally fine. And then we get past a year, especially when you only have 3 more years as president of the United States, then we know there will be a new president in charge. You want to start seeing some real big adjustments happening soon.
We inherited a mess, affordability, but you can call it affordability or anything you want, but the Democrats caused the affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it. And they have a tendency to just say this election's based on affordability, and nobody questions them, John. Nobody says, "Oh, well, what do you mean by that?" But they just say the word. They never say anything else because they caused the problem, but we're fixing the problem.
The way that you frame this from a psychological point of view, when you're talking about it, it's honestly sometimes better to, instead of saying a housing crisis, than to say people are homeless.
Right.
People are starving on the streets. That is something we can all get behind and understand. And it becomes this less blurry version of what affordability, as he said, is. What is when the economy is doing well in terms of the stock market, but people don't seem to be doing as well, or the prices are going down on certain things, but they're going up on others. How do we start talking about this and having constructive conversations?
It appears the president, even though he's still saying we inherited a mess, is starting to shift more on here is what we're doing to bring affordability back, and however you want to phrase that. But here is also the real truth. Bad policies that are put in place are more quickly realized in something like an economy than the correct policies. When you do what you see under the Biden administration, the ways that inflation spiked, the ways that the government spending was out of control, and that contributed to these things, it's much easier to wreck an economy than it is to rein it back in. And the president of the United States always has a big responsibility and a lot of pressure and eyeballs on helping the economy thrive. In reality, we don't want one single person, a president, to be the one that controls the economy. We want good policy in place from the government, which allows the American economy to thrive. We are starting to see that in many sectors. However, some of the very damaging things do affect the people that need it most in an economy. And so it can take a long time to dig out of that when it is really bad policies, when we were seeing year over year 10% inflation, when you were seeing monetary policy from the Federal Reserve, which was highly skeptical and still being criticized by President Trump to this day. You end up with a situation where it is kind of a V-type economy, where you have people at the top that seem to be doing very well, especially with the GDP growth, the job numbers. But then you have people in the middle where the inflation impacted things like housing much more disproportionately than food. You see food prices that can stabilize and even decrease, but you're seeing other needs of the American people that have gotten out of control. Things like housing, things like transportation. That's why people like Zoran Mandani, who said, I'm going to give it to people for free, I'm going to pause their rent.
From my point of view, things are thriving.
And both things can be true at the same time.
Right.
On paper, the GDP, the jobs numbers, the top line things that the president looks at are very good. They have actually gotten much better from the Biden administration. But that doesn't mean that the American people feel that immediately.
Yeah, they haven't felt it.
Nor does it mean that the right policies in some areas are in place to ensure that they will feel that. And so that's why I think it's important in the messaging, if the president can get out there and say how, not just what the economy's good, but how every American will start feeling that. That's the key to assuring people, to alleviating fears, and also helping conservative ideology going forward.
Yeah, we'll tune in tonight and we'll see what happens. Look, even here at the ACLJ, we have felt the pressure of this year. This year has not been our favorite year in terms of coming in here and doing these big fundraising drives and saying, we need your support. Obviously, we do, and we have felt the negative effects of the economy and what it looks like and what the last few years have looked like. Everyone has. But if you look at the numbers, we have seen an uptick over the last few months because people like you are starting to maybe have a little bit more trust in what's going on in the economic world and going, you know what? I feel like I can put my money where my mouth is right now. I can support the work of the ACLJ. Pray about it, think about it, and if you can, to give during our year-end drive right now.